Randy Robison here at Life Today TV with historian and founder of Wall Builders, David Barton. Thank you for being with us.
Hey Randy, thanks for having me.
Hey, we're glad you're here. You have kind of come to some notoriety lately because of your association with Glenn Beck. How did that whole relationship develop?
You know, it really was at the start of the year. Glenn had been at a rally, and he really felt like that in praying the Lord gave him 1 Corinthians 13, that what America needed was faith, hope, and charity. And so he wanted to go on the road and do some arena events that he called American Revival based on those three elements. So he found a speaker for the hope aspect, for the charity aspect, and he was kind of praying about who do I get for the faith aspect. And while he was at church one weekend, a couple of people came to him and said, hey, have you seen this stuff by Barton? Have you ever looked at this? And he said he had read it years before, and he said, but with people coming to him in church at the same weekend, he said, kind of in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, established type of stuff. And he said, okay, Barton's my guy. And so he called, and we had a talk. And so we did several arena events on what was called the American Revival, and that's how we got started. And since then, a number of other programs, number of other events, but that was really the start of it.
Now you just quoted 1 Corinthians to me. You talked about God in relation to Glenn Beck. Some of the criticism right now is that when he talks about God or Jesus, it's another Jesus. It's another God because he is a Mormon.
Yeah.
How do you contend with
well,
that?
What I tell people to do is, from my standpoint, having been in politics a lot of my life and held political office and et cetera, one thing I really dislike is identity politics. That's where you say, oh, the black movement or the Hispanic movement or the gay movement or youth movement. As Christians, we believe individually. Jesus died for us individually, not for groups. He died for individuals. And that was the neat thing about the resurrection of the Bible 500 years ago, was it brought back the individual. And when we got back to reading the Bible, then suddenly we're kings and priests and all the things in 1 Peter 2. And what happens is a lot of people judge Glenn on the label that he's Mormon. And therefore the individual stuff, oh, he's a Mormon. Wait a minute, judge him individually. Judge on the basis of what he says. Don't interpret what he says. I've been on the programs with him when he talked about individual salvation, when he talked about atonement, when he talked about redemption. I've been with him in arenas where that at the close of our arena, he would, close of the arena events, he would have the last hour. And we were there, and he said, you know, I've been praying. I really felt like the Lord told me I need to speak out of Ephesians 6. And so he's an artist. He went to the blackboard, drew a great Roman soldier, and the whole hour with that arena in Phoenix, he says, okay, here's the helmet of salvation, here's the feet shod of the preparation of the gospel, and he went through every part of the armor. He said, we don't fight against flesh and blood, we fight against principalities. And so I watched that, and if you just ignore the label, you know, people keep wanting to stick that label on there and judge them by the label. I don't care about the label. If a tree has a label that says I'm a banana tree, but it keeps bearing apples, I'm going to believe it's an apple tree. And that's really what I think hangs a lot of people up, is they've got a label that they want to judge them by. You can't do that. God looks individually at the heart. Here's a guy who was raised as a Catholic. He found Jesus in Alcoholics Anonymous when he really screwed up his life, and he's now going to a Mormon church. But that doesn't say anything about his personal relationship with Jesus, and that's what people need to look at.
So you believe that he is a Christian in every sense of the word?
I do. I mean, I literally have watched him pray and hear from the Lord and turn on a dime. And there's just, the fellowship is very good. We talk about the scriptures very openly, and he's just, again, I've heard of no other. I think it was really well described by Richard Land at Southern Baptist Convention. Said, listen to him, it's like watching a TBN program, you know, and that was really because the level of Christianity that you get. Now other people say, yeah, but I really know what he means with that word.
Right.
Hey, give him. We don't like people going around second guess. If you say something, you mean what you said. Yeah. And so out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, and we believe that from what Jesus said. Don't try to interpret the guy's words. You wouldn't want that anybody doing that to me or anybody else. And so that's what I find amazing, is we don't treat him the same way we want to be treated. We don't take him at his word. We have to interpret his word for him. We have to say, no, that's not what he really meant. You can't do that.
One of the
just can't do that.
Yeah, one of the common criticisms is that evangelicals are being seduced into endorsing Mormon theology.
You know, if evangelicals are that weak and flimsy on their own beliefs, shame on them. And that's why I love some of my Jewish rabbi friends. They're great, and they encourage Christian prayer at schools all the time because they said, we're strong in our faith. We're not scared of converting to Christianity. We're not that weak. And I thought it was really interesting that earlier this year when Davenport, Iowa decided that they wanted to take Good Friday off their civic calendar because it might offend somebody, Christians didn't say anything. The people who jumped out there were Jews like Dennis Prager, who said, no, you do not take the Christian holidays off the calendar. Now, he's comfortable enough in his own faith. Well, I'm not at all scared of losing my faith. I'm not so weak in my faith. I love the example we have from Elijah, where he gets up on top of the mountain with 400 false prophets, 450 prophets of Baal. He says, you guys pray all you want to, take all the time you want, you seek God as long as you want to, you just make sure I get my shot. That's a free market. Elijah wasn't scared of being outnumbered 850 to 1. And so that really is where I think Christians need to get. If they're scared that being with someone is going to shake their faith, they're not grounded very well at all.
Interesting perspective. The Black Robe Brigade at the 827, I think it was on the Friday prior.
Yeah.
Were there imams on the stage as well?
There may have been. I was responsible for getting about 250 ministers on the stage, and there may have been, but if there was an imam there, that's, again, just like Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Doesn't bother me in the least.
So you don't see it as compromising,
No.
but as going maybe into a place
that's like telling Jesus, you can't leave the synagogue. You have to stay in the synagogue. Don't you get out there with those sinners and publicans and others. It's like saying, I'm going to make you fisher of men, but I want the fish clean before you bring them to me. We can't do that.
Are you getting more criticism from Christians or from the left, the political?
Oh, no, Christians by far.
Really?
And it's really amazing. One of the things that I've watched over the years is, because I'm an ordained minister, I've been involved in Christian stuff for years, and one of the things that I've noticed is that I like the example of Moses. He only fought the Egyptians one time. He fought his own people for 40 years. They gnashed on him for 40 years. Yeah. And that tends to be the example of a lot of God's people. They'd rather chew on each other than they would to chew on somebody else. They'd rather go after Glenn Beck than they would go after Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi and others who have a Christian, they call themselves, Christians, and Nancy Pelosi, no fruit at all. Now, you get somebody who's culturally right, who's standing for the right things, and we'll go after them, but we won't go after the guys who bear the name of Christ. And
why do you think that is?
Well, I think because one thing is, if you go after Pelosi, she's liable to fire back and really get mean with you. You go after Beck, he's not going to fire back. He's going to turn the other cheek, and he's not saying anything back. And so it's a lot easier to go after Christians who won't come after you than it is to go after secular guys who might come after you. And the other thing that I found, an axiom I developed from church work is, I don't need enemies. I've got friends. And it really is that Psalms 22 thing that mine own friend with whom I dined is turned against me. And a lot of times I've learned that you really have to wear a bulletproof vest in this profession, but you always have to turn it to the back because it's a friendly fire that gets you. So it's not the secular guys that come after me near as much. And I got to say, it's not even Christians. It's a segment of Christians. It's a very loud segment. Because overwhelmingly, we didn't have any trouble getting those 240 Christian ministers on stage with Beck. They were happy to be there, happy to link arm in arm, be the Black Robe Regiment. But there's going to be critics on the outside. And, I'm certainly not perfect. But Jesus was, and he got more criticism than anybody I know. So it doesn't matter how perfect you are, you're still going to get the criticism. And so I don't let that sway me at all.
What are you trying to accomplish through all of this?
There's a couple of things going. I believe firmly in an institutional separation of church and state because God did that in the Bible. He said, Moses, you're over the civil stuff. Aaron, you're over the spiritual stuff. When King Uzziah tried to combine the two of them in 1 Chronicles 26, God himself showed up and said, no, you cannot be king and priest, two different things. So on the one side, you have theology, and that's the role of the church. On the other side, where government is, that's the culture. And that's not where theology belongs, is in the culture. What I'm doing is very much involved in the culture. I'm out there trying to get a God consciousness back in the nation, trying to get back there. Our rights do come from God. They are God-given rights. Government exists to protect those rights. That includes life and marriage. That includes public religion. That has nothing to do with theology. That has to do with values. And so on the value base, I can be with a whole lot of people that I wouldn't be with on the theology basis. But because we're different arenas, I'm not trying to establish theology in the civil arena. I'm trying to work on the culture and the values.
But Glenn Beck, who is very much a political personality, is calling his rallies spiritual
Right.
rallies.
Exactly.
He seems to be doing what you're talking about not doing.
No, but that's
combining
not
the
theology. Theology is when you, give the example. In the founding era, you have Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, both of whom not Christians. They're two of the few founding fathers who weren't Christians. But it is Jefferson and Franklin who probably do more for the advancement of Christianity with the rights we enjoy today than any others did. And they were talking about spiritual things all the time. I mean, Ben Franklin came up with a plan to raise church attendance in the state when he was governor of Pennsylvania. He came up with a plan to raise church attendance. Now, it didn't matter which church you went to. He wasn't trying to say you have to be a Quaker like he was, or Presbyterian like he also was, or a congregation. He wasn't saying, here's how you got to be baptized. Here's what you have to believe about the Trinity. Because this is an infant baptism or adult baptism. It's not immersion or sprinkling. We're not doing consubstantiation or transubstantiation. Those are all doctrinal issues. But in the area of being God conscious, I mean, that's the Ten Commandments. And the Ten Commandments, the first one starts off with the recognition of God. I am the Lord thy God. And so that promotion that Beck's doing of, hey, get back in church, get back to being God conscious, that's what Jefferson did in the Declaration. What we point to as American exceptionalism, we say, you know, there's 56 words in the Declaration that have made America different from every other nation. There's a creator. We're endowed by our creator with rights. Government exists to protect those rights, and below that you have the consent of the governed. That's a God consciousness, and that's what Jefferson did. That's what Beck's doing.
But if you were to get a lot more people in churches that were deceived churches with deceived theology or false, prophets.
So this is the cool thing about the free market experience in the Bible and in America, is truth will win out. We believe truth wins out. And I don't care what church you go to. I think that if I preach the gospel to you, I think the Holy Spirit's going to confirm the gospel in your heart, and we're going to win. And I don't care what church you're part of. So if we're afraid of them getting in churches, then that's because we're not doing our work of sharing the gospel with people and expecting God to take it home in their hearts. I mean, if we think that whatever church you get is where you're going to end up, then that eliminates the work of God in any way in their hearts. And I like the example that God gave. So, I mean, even Moses, he said, okay, guys, he said, you got a choice here. You can choose this way or this way. And even the verse we often cite from Joshua 24:15, where Joshua says, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. Look at the first part of the verse. He says, now, you got a choice. He says, you can serve the God of your fathers in the land of Egypt where they were, or you can serve the God of the Amorites in whose land you're now living. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. He says, you got a choice. You guys make your choice, but then you live with the consequences. And so that's what we've always had in America, was we didn't care at all as a Christian nation if other religions came here, because we always thought that evangelism would win out. We could share the gospel and win. And I'm still convinced that. So I let people get in any church they want to, but if the church is doing its work of sharing the gospel to people around us, we don't care. They'll end up in the right place.
I can't disagree with that for 1 second. You've got a lot of great resources out there that people can tap into. Tell me some of the ways with the iTunes and the Facebook.
Yeah.
Tell people how to get in touch with you.
We've got at wallbuilderslive.com, there's a lot of downloads. We do daily radio broadcasts, 30 minutes of areas of the culture and what's going on in the politics, Bible, etc. So those are downloads people can get. We also have at wallbuilders.com a lot of materials. We own about 100,000 documents from before 1812.
Yeah,
and so
amazing.
A lot of those are online. You can download them and see what the founders said about faith.
You can see them all.
Oh, yeah.
Very
We got a
cool.
lot of the originals.
Cool.
The very first Thanksgiving proclamation issued by George Washington, National Proclamation, it's online, and a lot of their handwritten documents. So there's stuff there, and there's also videos and DVDs and books, and so we've got a lot of stuff.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for spending some time with us here at Life Today TV.
Thanks, Randy. Appreciate it, man.